So, Carl, I'd like to read a passage from Davis's book, The Gift of Dyslexia. He says, "The gift is always there, even if it isn't recognized for what it is. In fact, many adult dyslexics use the positive side of dyslexia in their life work without realizing it. They just think they have a knack for doing something without realizing that their special talent comes from the very same mental functions that prevent them from being able to read, write, or spell very well. In other words, the
Yeah.
dyslexia is the root cause of many of their special gifts. What does this mean exactly?"
Yeah. Oh, that's a big question. And it's where people criticize the Davis work. It's where one of the biggest I always used to think it was a chink in the armor of Davis, but it actually isn't when you really look in. I recently did a short video that I haven't released because I'm so annoyed in it that I'm not sure I'll release it, because there was a prominent psychologist talking about ADHD. And the way he was talking about it was he was saying it's not a gift. We need to stop thinking about it as a gift and otherwise we can't get any legislation to help. And he then went on to describe really what I call the dark side of dyslexia, and or the dark side of these learning disability labels that are really very sad and very negative way of thinking about this whole subject. So I don't. Ron is in a caliber of just a human being that is above me, right? I'm nowhere near as talented as Ron is. And when I first sort of heard this statement of the gift of dyslexia, I was in a place in my life where, I would have just told you to get lost.
It's upsetting. It's upsetting to hear.
Well, it's misunderstood. So what we do in our society around this subject of these learning disability labels is we habitually focus on what the person cannot do. We're just looking at cannot do, and we list all the things that a person can't do. We put all those symptoms together, we give it a label, and there are 70 different labels. What Ron realized is that and if you think a bit about it from a scientific point of view, if a negative exists, there has to be a positive charge. There's a positive and negative charge to everything, right? Just on the deepest level of science, that's happening. So if there is a negative side to any of these learning disabilities, if that's what you want to call it, I call it dyslexia, but if you, whatever you label you want to put on there, then there is an upside to it. But the problem is we spend so much time focusing on the negative and we completely discount the positive. A lot of people never get the positive side. They don't explore it because our educational system has got so narrow. It focuses largely on academics, and that is not where our talent lies as people who are on this dyslexia spectrum. So Ron is basically saying that if dyslexia is a condition of our mind, which it is, and there is a negative side, the things that we can't do, then there is a positive side to it. But most people don't make the link. If that a person who is very, very good at drawing, they don't make that connection between the positive side of their dyslexia and the negative side. So I was having a very deep conversation about this with somebody who is a friend and probably on the spectrum as well. And then I've talked about this with, I haven't sort of gone public with this in one sense. And I was joking with this person and I said, well, is dyslexia a gift? And I said to him, well, yes, no, sometimes maybe. And the reason is it really depends on the person. Okay. And we focus so much on the negative beyond reason, actually.
And it becomes ingrained because right from kindergarten, it's emphasized.
Yeah.
Their inability to.
Yeah. So the way I also think about this is that if you, from a very young age, what the school system does by the definition of it, and also what happens to people who are on this learning disability spectrum, is we end up streaming them in a certain direction. They end up going down this road. Okay. So the whole of our school system has been geared up around academics. that everything is based on your ability with literacy and numeracy. And if you're not at grade level, and it measures depending on the country a little bit differently, and this is why it gets kind of complicated, because different countries do it differently, and what we do in Canada is different from what we do in the United States, and then it's different from England, and then it's different from South Africa or New Zealand. So all these little differences, people get sort of lost in the weeds, right? So what people don't realize is, I'm going to answer your question a long way around. Sorry.
Perfect.
When you take a child who is 6 years old and you expose them to an adult skill, what most people don't realize about literacy or reading and writing, that it was a skill set that was developed by adults for adults, and it was never intended to be given to children, ever. And that happened about 5,500 years ago. And then for the last 5,500 years, it's just basically stayed in an upper layer, like this upper layer of society at the top, an administration layer. It was developed for administration purposes. So it was kept at this top level, and it was considered secretive and also sacred. So you have government and church coming together, and they're the ones that are sort of ruling society 5,000 years ago, and most of society. And those are the only ones that need to read, because they're administrating it. And I've done a video on this as well. And if you look at that, what you realize is, on a long enough timeline, that what we're asking children's brains to do is an adult task. Okay. And the brain of a child is different from the brain of a fully developed adult that doesn't have these learning problems. So that's the crutch of the matter. We're getting kids, we're putting them in an environment, we're trying to get them to do which is directional towards academic lineal thinking, not creative thinking. That academic skill, which is all basically literacy, we teach them to do this adult skill, which their brain isn't ready to even do.
But some kids can't do it.
Right. About 20% of the population can do it from a young age.
The A students.
Right. The A students. So that's the argument that comes back. So if you take any subject, any subject out there, let's say making a pot out of clay, you're going to find quite quickly that you're going to have some people that are brilliant at making a pot, and you're going to have some that are not pretty good. You're going to have some people that are okay. You're going to have some people that are bad. And you're going to have some people that are disastrous. So you're going to filter people pretty quickly with any skill set into A's, B's, C's, D's, and F's. About 20% of everybody is going to fall into one of those categories.
We'll always get a normal curve.
Yeah. So do you play a musical instrument?
I am terrible at it.
Well, why not?
Standard deviations below the mean.
Right. So you would be a D or an F student where it comes to musical instruments.
Definitely.
However, we don't judge you, and your income isn't based on your ability to play the violin.
Exactly.
But your income is based on your ability with literacy, because that will base on what education you get. That will be based on what job you get.
I'm a teacher.
Money, right? So that's basically how that works. And the skill sets that dyslexic people are naturally very, very good at have very limited time in school, or they're just out of school altogether. We don't do them. And the people that are generally teachers, I'd say, and this is a bit of a generalization, they're probably not the creative types. They're probably more the lineal types who are good at the academic stuff, because that's why they're teaching it. So they're not so good at the creative stuff, right? And in the big picture, the school system is also trying to deliver employees. And we don't want too many. We want a certain type of creativity as an employee, but not too much. Okay, so
we need soldiers.
Pardon me?
We need soldiers who know how to follow the rules and instructions.
Or just like good worker bees. We need good people that will sit down, do their job, and get on with it, depending on what job you're doing, right? So is that really creative? No, it isn't. It's really good at following the rules, following a leader, all necessary things. And it's not a criticism. It's just that's the way things have developed over the last 10,000 years of society, right? As societies have evolved, that's what needs to happen. So the creative side of things is, particularly in I think in Canada, I don't think is really emphasized in schools. It isn't. And so depending on your access to that. So if you had, I was lucky from the point of view as my father was very interested in music and museums and art, and so was my mother. So I was sort of tromped all around Europe. I was exposed to all kinds of amazing things. My father used to take me to the opera when I was like 9 years old, and I saw La Traviata, Don Giovanni, Carmen when I was like 8 or 9 years old. So to go to the opera when you're 9 or 10 years old is
You were able to sit through it?
Oh yeah, I've seen all of them several
Because
times.
I'm dreaming of bringing my children to the opera, but my husband's like, I don't think that's a good idea.
I was probably between the ages of, I think the youngest time I was about 9, but I got a little older, like 10, 11. I mean, I certainly wouldn't take them when they were 5 or 6. They've got to be able to.
I'll wait a few years.
Yeah, but then he took me around all kinds of museums. But you know, I was probably no older than 12 when we went to the opera. Mm-hmm. And it was a lot of fun. You know, it was a grown-up thing that we were doing. We got to stay up late. We saw all this fantastic stuff. So that is opening the window to creativity. Where if you sit down a kid in front of a PlayStation, that is closing the window to creativity. You give them a piece of paper and some crayons and say, draw me a picture. That's opening the window. If we just watch some bad TV show, we all like to veg out. That's okay. We all like to disconnect. That's great. But if that's all we're doing, we're closing the door to creativity. If you just sit down in a classroom, do this exercise, remember this thing so you can pass the test and then forget it the next day, that's not opening the window to creativity.
And Temple Grandin Temple Grandin is always lamenting that there are so many brilliant neurodivergent minds, but they're just on their PlayStations. They're not given any incentive or opportunity to really use their gifts.
So that's why I say yes, no, sometimes maybe. So maybe if you are a parent that exposes your children to lots of diverse different things, you take them to museums, events, and not just the and I don't mean this to sort of be highbrow or anything, but really expose them to lots of different things.
Exposing them to beauty.
Lots of different things. They're going to see there's a potential in the world. Unfortunately, many people don't get that. I was extremely lucky in that point of view. And I do look back and go, wow, I've had a pretty unusual life compared to a lot of my clients. So I think that exposure to strange, new, interesting things that a lot of people don't like to do, I think, anyway, what opened it up. But one of the comments that Ron is making there about a lot of dyslexics just do what they do and don't know that they can do it. Because a lot of dyslexic like myself, I had a very negative experience in the last sort of 5 years of my school when I really realized I was dyslexic and I couldn't read. And it was just a disaster. I just gave up, in effect.
How old were you when you gave up? When you quit school?
I was probably about 13, 14. But I have a skill set that after later on, I just discounted. Like I can literally cut a scalpel line in half with a dovetail saw. So my gift was I was quite autistic. I made my first, I think my first piece of furniture, I was about 10 or 12 years old. It's a little stool that my mum had. My mother encouraged me to do creative things. And I had a little woodworking bench in the kitchen that eventually went out to a little work shed. So she let me have sharp chisels when I was 10 years old, right? And if I cut my finger, oops, gonna learn, don't cut your finger, right? So right, so nowadays that probably wouldn't happen, right? So I made furniture and I was very good at that. And so here's an example of what I mean the gift is. So I originally did a drawing of a piece of furniture, and then I made, so I can get it in shot here, a little model of a small table. Now that's a 1/4 scale model that I saw the picture in my head. I drew the thing on a piece of paper, so I knew that I could do it, because then if I draw it, then I know my mind knows how to make it. Then I did a little model of it. So get that in camera shot. There's a little model of the thing made.
So cute.
Right? That's a 1/4 scale. And there's a picture of the finished piece, the real table. So my thinking processes basically had an idea, that idea grew. I put it on paper. I could explore it in my mind, in my picture thinking mind. This is where Ron is saying the gift side is the picture thinking. Then once I'd explored it in my mind, I could draw it. If I could draw it, I then worked out how to make it in my thinking. Then I drew it full size on a piece of plywood, and then I actually made the thing. And I have it in the other room. Okay. So another example of that is, this is a small box that I made. Oops, get this in shot as well. So this is a little jewelry box. It was an experiment to see if a technique would work. And that little person is what we call marquetry. And it's little pieces of wood that are all cut out like a jigsaw puzzle.
Mm-hmm.
And it opens up like this, and the lid slides off, and it's a little box. So this for me was something I did when I was doing another job, and I was experimenting with woodworking techniques. And so this is just a little jewelry box that I made as a result. Now people go, that's amazing, that's brilliant, that's fantastic. And I go like, yeah, but I can't read. So to me, that's easy. To me, if people can't do that kind of work, I go, well, but you bang your head, do you have like a woodworking disability or something? But we don't say that somebody has a musical disability if you can't play the violin. So if we looked at you and your life and said, well, you can't play a musical instrument, you're musically disordered, you have a musical disorder that stops you from being musical, right? We just say people that play the violin are talented. But if we did say that about you, you would be considered really rude, right? So the skill set moves things off. It's a biased skill set, in effect, that starts at a very, very young age, that closes down one part of somebody's thinking and wants them to open up another part of their thinking. And like all skill sets, there is an A student, a B, a C, a D, and an F. And what you'll find is a lot of kids that have these learning disability labels, they're an A and a B in creative things, and they're a D and an F in academic things. And then we get into this whole argument about academics that is heavily weighted on the side of people who can do it, right? And not heavily weighted on the sides of people that cannot do it. And I think Ron is the only person I've ever really talked to or has a deeper understanding of this gift side. And it is really underestimated. And I think that because of the negative side, when you say, so I was working with a little boy this week and we were talking about the gift side of it. And I said to him, look, if I first met you and I said, dyslexia is a gift, you would have gone, pfft. Because this kid is in grade 8 and he's reading at grade 2. His life doesn't feel gifted. Mm-hmm. And a lot of dyslexics, they've got so stuck in this paradigm of over here of being a disorder and being stuck and actually not being able to read or not being able to focus, all the things that they can't do, that it becomes life affirming. So I had a positive attitude in some areas, but where it came to my reading, I had very, very low self-esteem. I was extremely hard on myself. I literally used to punch myself in the head to try and get myself motivated to do things and really be internally very, very hard on myself. And when I mean punch myself, I mean sort of, oh, come on, do this kind of thing. And quite hard because I get in this loop and the only way to get out of the loop was to boom, boom. So people would look at that, and if you look at that on the surface, you'll say, well, this person's got a disorder and they're being oppositional defiance, or there's some sort of disorder in their brain because they're hitting themselves, and that's self-deprivating behavior. But what they don't realize is I'm doing it out of frustration and anger because I can't move past this literacy thing. And so that's what we focus on. And for me, it was pretty heavy. I had a lot of very negative things happen around my early years of schooling, very good. My mother tried really hard. She did an excellent job, realistically, given who she was, where she was, and the time. At the last few years in school, I just completely gave up. And the negative side of that is that it's a life-affirming thing that comes very quickly because it's essentially, I can't. It all adds up to I can't. And the gift side is I can, right? But if you're constantly exposed to all the things you can't do repeatedly, 5 days a week, 5 to 6 hours a day for 12 years, you will mentally get the impression that you are not gifted.
There needs to be a paradigm shift.
I have a video on my website that's called The Paradigm of a Learning Disability, the Paradigm of a Learning. So is it a gift? Yes, no, sometimes maybe. On a long enough timeline, when you really understand what Ron is saying, yes, there is a massive upside. Yes, it is. It truly is a gift. At the same time, it very often, for the person that has the problem, it doesn't feel like a gift. And when you say that, and it doesn't happen, if you look at your situation and your son, you can probably see there's some really amazing things about him, but when he's having a really tough time, you and him probably don't feel gifted, right?
It
So
really
that's
depends. Yeah, exactly. And
so it's like an itch you can't scratch, right? It becomes more painful, more difficult. So I hope that is a long answer. I hope that's a good enough.
perfect. Thank you.
Hi, I do hope you enjoyed that video. If you would like to find the nearest Davis facilitator to you, you need to go to the links below. They'll be listed in the description somewhere, depending on which channel you're watching this on. If you want to find the nearest Davis facilitator to you, I suggest you go there and just follow the links. If you're interested in training as a Davis facilitator, then again, just go to the links below. You'll find training there. Or if you're looking for a program for yourself, you can also go to those links. My suggestion, if you are really interested in Davis, the best thing to do is to pick up the phone and start talking to a Davis facilitator closest to you, because they will be able to answer all of your questions. That's it for now. See you in the next video.